Sachin Kolil to take over this session. Over to you, sir.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. This is the Beginner's Guide to Studying Abroad. So in this session, I hope all of you guys, if you're attending this webinar, that obviously means that you have some plan or some wish to study abroad one day. And I hope that this session is sort of your starting point if you have no idea about how to go about things. So when I actually started my study abroad process, I was lucky because I had a lot of friends who had already gone abroad or were thinking about going abroad. I could ask them a lot of questions. But I understand that not every student across the country has that kind of resource and that kind of connection. So having gone through the process myself, I conduct all these webinars so that you guys also have like a base understanding, and it sort of gives you like a starting point from which you can pursue your higher education. Okay, so by the end of this session, you guys will have a fundamental understanding of how to apply to colleges abroad. Right. So we have 3 very simple guidelines for this session, and these are the same guidelines that I have for like all my sessions. Okay. First thing is I want you guys to go grab a notepad and a pen. Okay. This is very important because I'm going to be sharing a lot of information throughout the session, and all this information is going to be super useful to you when you are studying abroad or when you're planning to start your application to study abroad. So what I'll do is I'll give you guys some time, of course, to take screenshots and stuff to save it in Paint, and so you can refer to it later. But of course, if you have a notepad and pen, that's going to make life a lot easier. All right. So first step is to go grab a notepad and a pen. Second is we're going to have our Q&A at the very end. Okay. So at the very end of the session, I always like to take everyone's questions before we close. So if you have any questions, please write them down in your notepad and pen, and feel free to ask me at the very end, and I'll be happy to answer. All right. Finally, I want you guys to engage. So throughout the session, I'm going to be asking you guys a lot of questions. And I'm really hoping to get a response from you guys, right? This sort of helps you guys, stay engaged with the session, but also helps me understand that there are people on the other side of this camera, that I'm not all alone in my room and all that. Okay. So once you guys have your notepad and pen ready, please type ready in the chat so that I know that you guys are good to go, and then we can begin. All right. That also goes back to the whole thing of what I said about engaging. Let me just check how I can see your chat. Perfect. Okay. So I can see everyone's chat. Awesome. So here is the agenda that we have for today. Right. So first thing is I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and our firm, what we do. And then I'm going to give you guys a bird's eye view of the application process. So like 7 steps that you guys follow in general to be able to study abroad. And then we're going to talk about the different degree options. So I understand that, you guys are a school where you have bachelor's in social work and psychology and master's in, HRM and all that. So I've tailored this presentation to make sure that I talk about the different degree options that you guys have being, students of those programs. Okay. Then we're also going to talk about the most popular countries, and I'm going to give you the pros and cons of each country. Then we're going to talk about general program requirements. So what are the basic things that universities abroad expect from you for you to be able to study there. Then we're going to talk about building a profile. So how can you guys build a strong profile to get into some of the best universities around the world? Then we're going to talk about the timeline of the process. So when do you take your examinations? When are university deadlines? When do you get your acceptance letters? When do you apply for education loans, visa interviews? When do classes start? All that, right? Then we're going to talk about getting an education loan and visa. We're not going to go into this too much because this is something that you guys can explore later, down the line in your application process. But I'm just going to give you a brief introduction so you guys have some idea of what to expect when this inevitably comes. Then we'll have our FAQ. So I usually get like a bunch of questions that students always ask me. So I have the answers prepared just in case you guys have the same questions. Then we're going to discuss where you guys can find more information outside of this webinar, if you want to find more information about studying abroad. And then we'll have our Q&A. Okay, so I know that looks like a big agenda, but this is only going to take around 35, max 40 minutes. And then we're going to have time for our Q&A. All right, so let's begin, right? So first, about us. For me, I am a digital admissions coach. So I help students, prepare for the GRE examination and create their application and stuff so that they can go and study abroad. So as she mentioned, I have a 340 out of 340 my GRE. I took it in 2019. And I'm also an incoming master's in mechanical engineering student at the University of Pennsylvania, due to join in spring 22. That's January 22. And essentially what we do as a firm is we make it easy for you guys to prepare for the GRE and apply to master's, PhD, and MBA programs abroad. All right. So if you want to like check us out, we have an Instagram profile, we have a YouTube channel, we have a website. Make sure that you guys write it down and check us out later. All right. So let's talk about the bird's eye view of the application process. Right. There are going to be essentially 7 steps that you guys follow, and then all you have to do is just follow these steps in order, and then you'll be able to study abroad, no problem. Okay, so before I get to the bird's eye view of the application process, I want to know from you guys. I'm sure that if you were watching this webinar, right, you obviously don't know everything there is to know about studying abroad. Okay, so what I want to know from you guys is what point are you getting stuck at, right? So are you having trouble choosing which degree? So if you're having trouble choosing which degree, type that in the chat. Are you having trouble choosing the right country? If so, type that in the chat. Are you guys having trouble with thinking about your finances? Because studying abroad can be expensive. So are you guys having trouble with your finances, thinking about how you can fund your education? Let me know in the chat. And are you guys just confused about the entire process? You don't know where to begin? Just let me know in the chat. Okay. So I'm very curious to know, what you guys are having trouble with, so that I can sort of explore that a little bit more in my presentation, and then hopefully, that'll be of use to you. Okay. So let me know in the chat what you guys are having trouble with in your whole study abroad process. All right. Okay, so we have trouble choosing degree, degree finance, right country, and of course finance, country, and just confused in general, confused with the whole process. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's a completely obscure process, and there's no like right guide online. So I'm hoping that this presentation can serve as a guide for you guys. Okay, so for those of you that are confused with your different degrees, I'm going to be exploring different degrees in the presentation, and the right country as well. I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons, so you guys are better informed and you can make the right decision for you. All right. So if you guys are completely confused about the whole study abroad process, then this is the slide that you need to pay attention to, because I'm going to be breaking it down into 7 simple steps that you follow, and then you'll be able to land at your dream university. All right. So step 1. First thing you do is choose your degree and specialization. So I know that some of you guys are having a little bit of trouble with it, but don't worry, I'll be looking into that. I'll be exploring that a little bit more in the presentation, right? But this is essentially the first step that you need to do, absolutely must do, right? Before you figure out which country, before you figure out when you're going to go, which university and all that, you need to know what degree you want to take and what kind of career you want, and the specialization, because generally at a master's or PhD level, we tend to specialize in a particular area. So you guys need to have your specializations ready as well. Okay. Next, you're going to choose your target country. So now that you know which degree you want, which career you want, then you choose whichever country you want to apply to, because the requirements and the deadlines and the costs especially will change a lot depending on the country you want to go to. Then we talk about the program requirements, right? So what is going to be expected of you from the university? Like they'll want your degree certificate, they'll want letters of recommendation and all that kind of stuff. So you just have to find out all the requirements for you to be able to apply to that program, right? Then you go about fulfilling those requirements, right? So if they want the GRE, you take the GRE. If they want the IELTS examination, you take the IELTS, right? If they want letters of recommendation, you give them letters of recommendation, right? Whatever those requirements are, you go about fulfilling those requirements. Then step number 5 is just to apply, and then within a month or 2, you get your admit and reject. You pick one of the admits, and that'll be the university that you're going to, right? Step 6, you get your education loan and your student visa. So education loan comes first, and then once you have your loan ready, then you apply for the student visa, right? And then step 7, you fly to college. That's it, right? So in general, this is like the bird's eye view of the application process. As long as you guys follow each steps one by one, you'll be able to study abroad. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to either write this down in your notebooks or take a screenshot, save it for later. Okay, and then we're going to move on. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's move on. Okay, so now let's talk about the degree options. So what I usually do is, because I usually present this towards engineering students, STEM-based students, we talk about what is a core field, and then we talk about shifting towards like the management related side of things, or like a completely different role. So for you guys, what I've done is I've identified a few degree options that you guys can sort of take that are very similar to what you are currently doing. And then I've also explored some other degree options that you guys can possibly take with your existing degree, which might be a little bit different from what you're doing. Okay, so you guys will understand more when I show you. So let's start with what you are currently doing, and then the higher level of that, right? So since you guys are mostly bachelor's in psychology students and social work students, Your next step will be a master's in psychology itself, or a PhD in psychology, or even behavioral science, or even a master's in social work, right? So this is basically the degree that you guys are probably the most aware of, and maybe the most number of seniors who have gone to this degree. So this is like two of the degree options that you guys can take at a master's or PhD level, right? Then we move towards shifting. So we're going to stray away from the psychology and social work side, right? So towards human resource management. So if you guys have like social work degree or even a psych degree, you can absolutely get a human resource management related degree. You can even push towards development studies, and you can even push towards public policy. So if you guys are in social work currently, you can even take a master's in public policy, because they're not super connected, but yes, a lot of the information that you learned in your social work degree can be applied towards public policy, all that. Because public policy, generally, you'll be working with the government and all these big organizations and deciding the kind of policy that'll impact all levels of society, right? So social work, a bachelor's in social work and a bachelor's in psychology can really help with that, right? So we're moving away. Let's keep moving further away. Next up, we have the master's in entrepreneurship or master's in management. Okay, so these are degrees that you guys can take even if you're currently in a master's degree. So I just noticed that someone in the chat just said that I'm doing my final year in master's in social work, HRM. So if you're interested in starting up, right? If you're interested in having a startup and you want more knowledge about that, consider exploring a master's in entrepreneurship or a master's in social entrepreneurship. And depending on whatever your goals are, you can even check out a master's in management. So a master's in management is generally for people with a bachelor's degree, not a master's degree. It's essentially like an MBA light, right? So generally MBAs require a lot of work experience abroad. So if you want to get into that MBA related field and you don't want to work for that long, then a master's in management is a good alternative, right? But a master's in entrepreneurship, everybody can apply. So if you guys are interested in entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship and all that, if you're interested in being a part of nonprofit organizations and starting to lead those organizations, then master's in entrepreneurship, perfect, right? Then moving forward, we have the MBA, right? So the MBA is of course going to be a shift from your current degree, because the reason why is if you take an MBA, right? First of all, it's going to require a lot of work experience, so you need to think about working first. Second thing is when you guys take an MBA, you can either stay in your current field. So if you guys are currently, you guys have like a bachelor's in psychology or like a bachelor's in social work or even a master's in HR. If you want to stay in your current field, you can. But then if you want to pivot towards consulting or risk or strategy or finance, all these degrees, you can use an MBA to sort of pivot towards that degree, right? So that's why I'm talking about like a shift. So even if you start with the bachelor's in psychology, you can end up in like the finance sector if you take the right MBA, right? So that's talking about the shift. Next, we have moving forward, even shifting even farther away, we have environmental development and policy. So this might be a little bit of a stretch for psych students, but for social work students, it is possible for you guys to get into this field, especially if you're someone who really cares about the environment, because a lot of the environmental policy and all the environmental developments that take place, they need to analyze all the levels of society, right? So it can't just work for the middle class, it also needs to work for the lower class and of course upper class as well, right? So that's where your social work degree can come in handy if you want to switch towards environmental development and policy. Then of course we have international affairs as well. So international affairs is a super open degree, generally open to pretty much everyone from the arts domain, humanities domain. So if you guys want to get into international affairs, then that's also perfectly possible, right? So these are basically degree options that I was able to find within like a day's worth of research. So as you guys do more work or more research, speaking to more graduates, speaking to more professors, attending all these study abroad events and stuff, you'll be able to find out more opportunities for you to more degree options that you guys can explore. Right? Now, what happens is generally whenever you pick a particular degree, ideally you should have some sort of profile that's built towards that degree. Okay. For example, let's say you are currently doing a bachelor's in social work. You want to switch towards an environmental policy degree, right? It's far right. Right? So if you want to do that, then you should showcase in your profile that you have some sort of internships or volunteering where you deal with environmental, like issues and all that. And then, that way you can sort of convince the admissions officers that, you are the right fit for this degree option, right? So you guys want to make sure that you guys have a sort of profile that can be built towards whatever degree you are applying for. So I see a question in the chat that asks about, what are the different degree options that you can apply after doing a master's in social work here. So the first thing you can apply is, of course, the MBA, right? So the MBA is definitely open to every single type of career possible. So an MBA is definitely something that you can consider. You don't have to stay in your social work domain. You can move towards consulting for non-government organizations, nonprofit organizations. That's something you can definitely check out with an MBA, right? It does require work experience. Besides that, of course, even international affairs and stuff is going to be open for you guys to apply to, right? So what I recommend is that, there's a lot of these conferences and stuff where universities come in, all these admissions officers and stuff come in. So you can talk to them, say like, I have a master's in social work degree. I'm interested in studying abroad. Do you have any options, or like, can you suggest some options that I can check out, right? And then they'll have some options for you. All right, so those are the degree options. I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to take a screenshot or write it down, and then we'll move on. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's go. Next, so quickly, what I want to talk about is an MBA and a PhD, right? So just take a couple seconds to read what's on the screen. Okay, so if you guys are planning to do an MBA abroad, keep in mind that you will need a solid amount of work experience. If you have less than 3 years of work experience, it's really not recommended that you apply for an MBA abroad, because an MBA is a professional degree meant for professionals, right? So they expect people to have work experience so that they can contribute to the incoming class, the class discussions and all that. Okay? So you want to make sure that you have at least 3 years of experience before you apply, ideally 5 or 6 years, so you can talk about a lot of the wins that you've had at work and all that, right? But if you want to get into like a management related role and you don't want to spend a lot of time working, then consider the master's in management degree. So it's like an up and coming degree that not many people know about these days. But I mean, it is like, up and coming. So people are getting to know about it a little bit more. So it's like a degree, it's like an MBA light where you get to sort of switch into management or risk or strategy consulting, whatever you want to switch into, but doesn't require work experience, and generally is shorter than an actual MBA. Yeah. You can always do an MBA later if you want to. Next, the PhD. So if you guys are looking to get into a PhD program, keep in mind that you will need a strong research experience. So generally, PhD in psychology, that's like a very common thing that students do. So a lot of programs abroad that I've found, they will just generally accept students directly from their bachelor's and PhD, bachelor's in psych programs to a PhD in psych, where they earn a master's degree along the way. So it'd be like a 5 or 6 year program where after the 2-year mark, you'll have the master's, and then you'll continue onwards to earning a PhD. Right. So PhD is going to be a big thing for psych students, because I think a lot of PhD students tend to do a lot of psych students tend to do PhD somewhere down the line. Right. So anyway, if you guys are thinking about doing a PhD, you will need to have strong research experience. So either you get that in your bachelor's degree, or you do a master's degree and then you do the research work during that master's degree and then apply with that research work for a PhD program. Or you take a break after your bachelor's degree, do some research at your university or at a different university, and then apply for a PhD program later. Okay. Generally, PhD programs will be funded by the lab. And it's basically like when you're a PhD student, you're more like an employee of the research lab rather than a student, right? You won't be learning a lot of stuff. It'll mostly be you contributing towards the research work at the lab, and the end they give you like a PhD degree. That's usually how PhD works. All right. So let's move ahead. I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to take a screenshot if you need to. Otherwise, move ahead. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. So let's talk about the most popular countries, right? So now I just want to ask a question in the chat. What countries are you guys looking to apply to? Do you have any country in mind? If you plan to apply to the US, type US. If you plan to apply to the UK, type UK. If you're unsure, type unsure. That's perfectly fine. This slide should hopefully be able to give you guys enough information so you guys can make a decision later. Right. So we have a bunch of UK, Canada, awesome, 2 Canadas, Australia, UK, Finland, UK. I think this is the first webinar that I've done like this where nobody has mentioned the US. Generally, the US is the most popular destination. There we go, 1 US, okay. All right, so generally the US is the most popular destination. Japan, awesome. Asunda, do you speak Japanese? Cornelius, Singapore. I'm currently learning Japanese using Duolingo. I recommend you check it out. That'd be helpful. Then Canada, Singapore, Germany. Awesome. Okay. So if you guys are sure about your country, then that's awesome. But if you are not sure and you are open to applying to different places, I'm going to give you guys the pros and cons of each country right here, so you guys are better informed. Right. So let's begin. Let's start with the USA. So I'm going to take every country, I'm going to compare it to the USA because USA is generally the most popular destination. So there's the most information available about it online. So US offers the best quality of education for most programs, right? So in psych, of course, it might be competitive with the UK. In social work, I think the US will lead pretty well. I mean, even there are a lot of good places, good universities in Europe and the UK that do offer good social work programs. But the USA, when it comes to like MBA programs and stuff, the USA will lead a lot. So anyway, so USA generally offers the best quality of education because they have the most number of universities within the top 100 ranking. So that's how I sort of measure quality of education. The more number of universities that a country or region has in the top 100, the better I look at, as a quality of education in that particular country. Right. So if you want to get into a top 100 university, it's most likely that if you apply to the US, you'll be able to get it. Right. US also offers high-paying jobs. That's generally why people apply there. It is the most expensive country to study in, of course, by far. And immigration is really complicated, right? So generally what happens is if you're a STEM student, that means science, technology, engineering, mathematics. If you're a STEM student, after your program, you can stay there for 3 years and work, and then you have to apply for an H-1B. Right? So if you don't get an H-1B, then you have to leave the country. You get an H-1B, then you can stay for another 6 years and then apply for another H-1B. Right? That's how it works. If you're a non-STEM, so if you're a psych student, I believe you will fall under STEM, so that'll be fine. But if you're a social work student, you might not fall under the STEM category, which means that you can only work there for 1 year and apply for the H-1B. And if you don't get the H-1B, then you have to leave. Right? So that's why immigration is a little bit complicated. For people who are looking to settle in their target countries abroad, the US is not really the best destination for that, right? Because if you don't get that H-1B, you'll have to leave the country. It's very complicated. Right? Okay. Let's talk about Canada. So Canada, again, cheaper than the US for sure. Immigration is really simple. So if you guys want to live in Canada after you study there and graduate, no problem. Path to citizenship is very simple there. There is a little bit of a lower quality of education compared to the USA. Right? So if you do study in Canada, it's perfectly fine if you want to work in Canada and stuff. But if you're looking at the total global scope in terms of the number of universities in Canada that are in the top 100, not many are there. Right? So if you get into some awesome university in Canada that's better than any university, then that's better than most universities in the USA. That's great. So anyway, that's Canada. Then we have Singapore. So Singapore, also great quality of education. NTU and US are among the best universities in the world. Cheaper than the US, but still pretty expensive. And immigration is really complicated in Singapore. So in Singapore, once you graduate, if you don't get a job within like the first 2 or 3 months or something, then they pretty much kick you out of the country. Right? So you need to have like a work visa in order to be able to stay in Singapore and continue living there. So if you lose your job and if you don't find one within another like 60 days, 90 days or something, then again, they kick you out of the country. So it's very complicated in terms of the immigration. But otherwise, quality of education is solid. It is cheaper than the US as well. Next, the UK. So the UK, great quality of education. Immigration is also pretty simple. It is a little expensive to live in the UK and study in the UK. And the master's is 1 year long. So now this can be a pro or a con. That's why I started, depending on how you look at it. Right? Because it's only a 1 year long program, you only have to pay 1 year's fee, right? So that means it'll tend to be a little bit cheaper than a lot of programs in the US and maybe even some programs in Canada. But the problem with the 1 year long master's program is that because it's so short, it will be really hectic, right? So they'll try to cram as much as they can within that 1 year long program. You'll also not have the opportunity to do an internship. So you won't be able to actually apply all the things that you learned in college into real life. And besides that, I think that's pretty much it. Like you also won't be able to specialize as much as possible within a 1 year program because you have a smaller time to specialize. Let me give you guys an example, right? So if you do an MBA in the US, how it works is the first year is called like common curriculum. And in the second year, you specialize completely in whatever you want to do, like consulting, finance, accounting, strategy, whatever, right? And in a 1 year MBA program, that's not necessarily the case because you get to do the common core for like 6 months and then you do the specialization for 6 months. So if you are, say, a social work student and you're trying to get into finance, right? 6 months of finance education might not be enough for you to be able to have a strong grasp of what goes on in the financial world. So then it might be a better idea for you to apply like a 2 year program, right? But besides that, UK is a pretty solid choice. Then Germany, right? So Germany is generally better for STEM students. For psych, I'm not really sure how good Germany is. I haven't looked into it. But anyway, in general, Germany offers a great quality of education towards STEM students. It does offer cheap education. So if you guys are, worried about your finances, consider applying to Germany. I think one of my friends is applying. He already applied there, so he's planning to go in September, October. His program starts in October. So I think his fees are something like 800 euros a semester. Of course, he'll have to pay for his living expenses and stuff, but his fees are something like 800 euros a semester. Super cheap. Immigration is also really simple. So if you want to live in Germany after you graduate and settle there, no problem. There might be a language barrier because knowing German is kind of important when you want to work in Germany after you graduate. It's not 100% necessary, but yes, it is highly recommended that you know it. Master's tends to be over 2 years long for certain programs. Not every program, but many programs, master's can be over 2 years long. They will have high admission standards. So you need to be like a good student to be able to get a slot in like a good university in Germany because they do have high admission standards. Then talk about Europe. So Europe, again, cheap education compared to the rest of the world in a lot of cases. Immigration is also pretty simple in Europe. Generally lower quality of education. So quality of education can be really good in Europe if you go to like the best universities in Europe, right? So like TU Delft and like ETH Zurich, all these top universities across Europe, then that's great. You have awesome quality of education. But in general, the average university in Europe is not as good as say like some like decent university in the US. That's why the quality of education is a little bit lower. The language barrier, it can vary, right? So if you're applying to say Sweden, right? So Sweden is a great place for students, and you don't need to know Swedish, right? Because Sweden, like everyone in Sweden speaks English. Versus if you apply to say France or something, then it might be a little bit of language barrier because a lot of people speak French there. So not knowing French might be a disadvantage in your career and all that. Right? So language barrier depends on the country, right? Finally, we have Australia. So Australia, lower admission standards. So even if you're not like a great student, you can still get into a pretty decent college in Australia. Immigration is also pretty simple. If you want to live in Australia after you graduate, no problem. Generally, a little bit of a lower quality of education in Australia when it comes to a lot of the universities there, right? But there are some pretty good universities in Australia if you want to apply that, right? So those are the most popular countries and their pros and cons. I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to quickly take it down or take a screenshot, okay? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. So I couldn't talk about the other countries like Japan. I know this is applying to Japan, right? So I couldn't talk about Japan because it's not technically like among the most popular countries for students to apply to. So that's why I don't really have a pros and cons thing, right? But generally, quality of education in Japan is pretty solid. It's mainly that language barrier. People are more accepting of students these days that don't speak Japanese, but still not knowing Japanese might not be the best thing for your career if you're planning to stay long-term in Japan. All right. Then let's talk about general program requirements. So basically, what are the base essential things that universities expect from you when you guys are planning to study abroad? All right. So let me give you guys an example of application requirements. So this is the application requirements for a master's in mechanical engineering at Purdue University. And this is going to be pretty much or very similar to all the programs that you guys are applying to. All right. So just take a look at what's on the screen. Okay, so these are the general program requirements for most programs out there, right? So they will require a bachelor's degree in a related field. Some programs, they'll be more open. They'll be like a bachelor's degree in any field, right? Transcripts, you will have to send your transcripts either online or physical. Statement of purpose is basically like an essay that talks about, why you're applying to that degree, why that university, what your career goals are, so on. Then 3 letters of recommendation. Generally, most programs will require 3 letters of recommendation. Or 2 for an MBA program. Generally, business-related programs will require just 2, but usually programs require 3 letters of recommendation. They will require a resume, and of course, a GRE score. GRE score depends. So, like some universities might ask for it, especially for the programs that you guys are applying to. It might be necessary, it might not be. If you're applying to say an MIM program, Masters in Management, or an MBA program, then yes, you will need like a GRE score or a GMAT score in one of those scores. TOEFL, IELTS, generally it'll be required for most of the programs out there. So you guys will need to take one of these examinations. GRE subject test, extremely rare. I know that there's a GRE subject test in psychology, but it's extremely rare that universities actually ask for this GRE subject test. And then answers to other essay questions. So some universities will have other questions like, how do you contribute towards the community? What is leadership to you? And all these kind of essay questions might be. All right. So these are the typical general program requirements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys 6 steps here, 6 steps that you guys can follow to find the program requirements for your particular university. All right. So let me just go here. Okay, somebody just asked a question in the chat about the 15 years of education thing. I will answer that at the very end because it's a little bit of a long answer. All right, so here are the 6 steps that you guys need to follow to find the program requirements for your particular university. Right? First step is go to the target university website. Right? Second step, go to admissions. Third step, go to graduate degree programs. Fourth step, find your particular program. Fifth step, look at application requirements. And sixth step, you want to repeat this for 2 or 3 universities. Right? So it might vary across a little bit for each university. For example, instead of admissions, maybe the information might be under academics. Instead of application requirements, it might be called program requirements or entry requirements. But generally, this is the step that you guys need to follow, right? So you want to make sure that you repeat this for 2 or 3 universities for each country. So if you're applying to the US, do it for 2 or 3 universities in the US. And if you're applying to the UK as well, then do it for 2 or 3 universities in the UK as well, right? Because it's going to be different depending on the country you're applying to, right? Again, I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to either write this down or take a screenshot, okay? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's proceed. Now let's talk about building a profile, right? So let me tell you guys, first let me tell you guys what a profile is, and then I want to know about a little bit about your profile and what you're worried about and all that. Right? So here, basically a profile is who you are on paper, right? So your internships, your work experience, your GPA, your GRE score, IELTS and TOEFL, entrepreneurship, online courses, volunteering, letters of recommendation, statement of purpose, all these things sort of combine to create your profile, okay? So here on the screen, I've put up what are the core profile elements and the auxiliary profile elements, right? So I've underlined work experience and internships because those are gonna be a little bit more important for you guys as, psych students, not psych students, mainly for social work students, that is gonna be pretty important. For psych students, I think a little bit more towards research and internships, maybe possibly internships, but more towards research. That's going to be more important. Okay, so take a couple seconds to read what's on the screen, and then what I want you guys to let me know in the chat is what you feel that you're lacking in. Right. So among all the things that I've listed on the screen in terms of your core and auxiliary, what do you feel you sort of lack in your profile? Is it a low GPA? If it's a low GPA, type a low GPA. Is it maybe a low expected GRE or GMAT score? Type that in the chat. Maybe it's a lack of research work or projects. Again, type that in the chat. Portfolios mainly for art students, not for you guys. So then SOP, again, SOP, we can probably forget about that for now. Maybe you guys don't have work experience, type that in the chat. Maybe you have a lack of internships, type that in the chat. So yeah, whatever you feel is sort of stopping you from applying to the best universities around the world, right? So what's stopping you from getting into, say, Harvard or something, right? That's the question. Let me know in the chat. And then I'll tell you guys how you can sort of compensate for that weakness in your profile so that you guys can get into better universities, right? Okay, lack of research, lack of internships, lack of offline practical experience. Okay, very interesting. More lack of research. Awesome. What else? I want to hear a little bit more from the social work students. What do you guys think is a weakness in your profile? Because when you are a psych student, yes, research is going to be very important for you to be able to get into like the top MS and PhD programs, right? So I understand that. But as a social work student, what do you feel you are lacking in order to be able to get into like a top university abroad? Okay. I'll wait for 2 more responses. Yeah, 2 more responses, and then we'll go ahead. Lack of clarity. Okay, interesting. 1 more response. Okay. Anybody worried about their GPA? Or do you guys all have awesome GPAs? Usually I get the GPA thing when I ask this question. So what do you guys think is stopping you from getting into, say, the best universities around the world? Okay, lack of research. Okay, so for most of you guys, it seems to be lack of research and practical experience, right? All right, so let me tell you guys how you can sort of compensate for that, right? So first thing you do is identify your weakness, right? That's always the first step, right? You got to identify what is the weakness in your profile. So for me personally, even when I graduated from college, the lack of research and projects and internships was a weakness in my profile, right? So that was, I identified my weakness first. Similarly, you guys have to think about what is your weakness. Is it a low GPA? Is it lack of research work? Is it a lack of internships? Or maybe even work experience, right? So all this kind of stuff sort of corresponds towards a low GPA, sorry, low weaknesses in your profile. So first thing is to do is identify your weakness. Second thing to do is to minimize your weakness as much as possible. So that means if you have a low GPA, let's say you're currently in second or third year, and you have a low GPA and you're worried about it stopping you from getting into like a great university, right? Maybe obviously consider raising your GPA now, but maybe consider waiting till after you graduate so that you have all the semesters in hand. And then maybe you can raise your GPA towards the later semester so that you can graduate with an overall good GPA, right? So that's a technique that you guys can use. Another thing is, of course, if you guys are lacking in your GRE, GMAT, then of course, go to coaching. That's going to help out a lot. If you guys are worried about your research work, either, like I said, you want to focus on you want to start doing research work now, or you want to maybe take a master's degree, like maybe in India if you want to, and then do research work there, and then maybe apply for a PhD abroad later. If you guys want to take a break after your bachelor's degree, because one of my friends, he applied for a PhD program, but what he did is he took a break after his bachelor's program to do research at IISc, and he was able to get in a couple of papers, and then that sort of strengthened his research profile, right? So whatever your weakness is, you want to minimize that weakness as much as possible. If you have a lack of internships, maybe start getting into internships now, maybe trying to get some work experience and all that. So yeah, try to minimize your weakness as much as you can. And the third step is to look at other elements in your profile, right? So, and then try to maximize those elements. So if you're someone that lacks research, try to make up for it using internships. If you're someone that lacks internships, try to make up for it using research. If you're someone with a low GPA, try to make up for it with a high GRE score, right? So there are things that you can do to work on the other elements of your profile so you can build a strong, rounded profile. You can use that to apply to college, right? So whatever your weaknesses are, first thing is to identify the weakness. Second thing is to minimize that weakness as much as possible. And third thing is work on the other elements of your profile so you can build a strong overall profile, right? If you are planning to apply to a MBA program, keep in mind that strong work experience is going to be very important for an MBA program, and impactful extracurriculars as well. They also want to know what you did outside of work, and the interview. Well, obviously, the interview is also very important for an MBA program, right? And for PhDs, of course, strong research work is going to be very important. Don't bother applying to a PhD program if you don't have research work, right? That's very, very critical. All right. So now let's talk about the timeline of the process, right? So before I get to the timeline, I'm kind of curious, what intake are you guys planning to apply to, right? So if you guys are unaware of if you're aware of what intake you're planning to apply to, let me know in the chat. If you're unaware of what intakes are and what are the intakes you can apply to, let me just tell you guys that there are two main intakes, right? There's a fall intake, which is a September intake, and a spring intake, which is a January intake. So when they say fall 22, that means the classes will begin in September of 2022, right? That means the deadline might be in early 2022 or late 2021 for the program, right? And spring intake is, of course, when the program starts in January. So for my program, it's in spring 22. That means the program starts in January 2022. Okay. So let me know in the chat, what intake are you guys planning to apply to? Is it fall 22, type fall 22? Is it fall 23, type fall 23, spring 22? Let me know in the chat very quickly what intake you guys are planning to apply to. Okay. All right. So most of you guys are planning to apply to fall 22. Nagalakshmi, you said you're applying to spring 22. Spring 22 might be a little bit difficult for you now because a lot of universities will be closing their deadlines this month or next month. So just be careful about spring 22. Fall 22 should be no problem. Anyone else? I'll wait for one more response. We'll move ahead. Yeah, fall 22. Okay, for fall 22 is perfectly fine. One more response, then we'll move ahead. What intake? If you're unsure, again, type unsure. That's perfectly fine. Right? You're here to learn. Fall 22. All right. So for most of you guys seem to be applying to fall 22. That's perfect. So fall is generally the more popular intake, just because everybody graduates in May. So there's gonna be like a maximum amount of students who are thinking, okay, what's next, and then apply to grad school, and then September just becomes like the natural option, right? So that's why fall is generally the more popular intake. Now, when it comes to deadlines, what you guys need to know is that the US university deadlines tend to be the earliest of all the deadlines out there, right? So it's like in Europe and stuff, the deadlines will be like, say, 3 or 4 months after US university deadlines. US university deadlines are always the earliest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a timeline that you guys can follow to make the US university deadlines, right? So let's say you're applying to US university deadlines and follow this timeline and you should be good to go. If you're planning to apply to Canada or Australia or anywhere in the UK, all that, then you can push everything you see here by a month or two, and you should still be fine. You should still be in time for the deadlines, okay? So first, let's talk about in a 4-year program versus 3-year program and all that, right? So generally, if you guys are in a 4-year program, if you're like an integrated program or something like that, right? If you're in a 4-year program, then you take your exams in your 6th semester, apply in 7th semester, and then get admitted in 8th semester and fly after you graduate. If you guys are in a 3-year program, right, subtract everything by 2. Right? That means you take your exams in 4th semester, you apply in 7th semester, you get admitted in 8th semester, and then you fly right after you graduate. So there's a little bit of flexibility here, right? So you don't have to take your exams in 6th semester. You can take it in 7th semester also, perfectly fine. You don't have to apply to college in 7th semester. You can also apply in 8th semester. Sorry. Let me just change that up a little bit. So I was saying 4, 5, 6, right? You don't have to take your exams in 4th semester. You can take it in 5th semester. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to apply to college in 5th semester. You can also apply in 6th semester as long as the deadline is still there. And of course, you'll always be admitted in your last semester. In your 6th semester, if you guys are in a 3-year program, that's when you'll be admitted for your college, right? And then you'll fly right after you graduate. So let me talk about month by month. So here's a month by month breakdown of what you guys need to be doing, right? Let's say you're applying to fall 22. Then here's what you need to be doing in 2021 and 2022. So first half of the year till say September or something, right? You guys are gonna be looking at programs, preparing for the different exams, IELTS, TOEFL, GRE, whatever you plan to take. And then ideally you want to take all your exams by the end of September, right? This is for US, right? Remember, these are the US dates. Then in October and November, you're going to work on shortlisting universities, getting your letters of recommendation from your professors and internship supervisors, preparing your statement of purpose and all that. Right? October, November is for that. Then deadlines to top US universities will close around December. So deadlines to say like Stanford and stuff will close like early December, right? So a lot of universities will have deadlines in January and February. That'll be fine. But I just want to give you guys the earliest deadline, right? I don't want you guys to miss any deadlines. So top university deadlines will close in December, but many of the other universities will close in Jan and Feb. You will begin to get your results, admits and rejects in February, March, and April. Then you start looking into your education loan like right after you get your admit. So in May, June is mainly when you're going to be doing all the education loan stuff. Then you'll be focusing on the visa interview and getting all the visa process ready in August. And then your classes will begin around September. Okay, this is the approximate timeline for top universities in the US. If you're applying to other countries, you can push everything you see here by a month or two. You'll be fine. Even like lower ranked US universities, you can push everything by a month or two. It'll be fine, right? But then everybody gets their results at approximately the same time. March, April, March, April, May is generally when the results will come in. And the loan process and the visa process is going to be the same for every single country, right? Classes will also begin around September for most countries out there. Okay. So this is the timeline. I want you guys to, again, take a couple minutes to take a couple seconds to either write this down or take a screenshot, right? So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's move on. Now, getting an education loan and visa. So this part, we're just going to quickly go over it. I don't want to give you guys a lot of information here because this is something you can explore later, right? So take a couple seconds to read what's on the screen about education loans. Okay, so when it comes to education loans, you can get it from two places. Either you can get it from non-banking financial companies like HDFC Credila or Prodigy Finance or Incred or Leap Finance. There's a bunch of these companies, right? Or you can get it from a bank, right? So a bank like SBI, Axis, and all that. So there's like different amounts that they offer, and interest rates and all these things will change, like moratorium period and all that stuff. Generally, NBFCs will be more advantageous when it comes to taking a student loan, but of course you can take it from a public bank like SBI, Access, and all that. That's perfectly fine. Now, what you want to do is you want to apply either after you get admission, or you can just apply. You can just apply for the education loan right after you submit your application, right? So they do something called the pre-approval, which is where they look at your profile and they look at the country you're applying to and the universities you're applying to, and they give you like an approximate amount of how much they can offer you, right? So the advantage of applying early is because once you get your admit, then you can immediately complete the rest of the formalities, which should be very small. And then you can get your education loan like ready and processed, right? That's why you want to apply as early as you can. You will need an earning family member to sign off, right? This is very important. It can be a parent, it can be like an uncle. Universities, how much of an education loan you want to take is generally you want to take first year's tuition plus living expenses. That's the general amount you're looking for, right? Usually the loan amount will be that amount. Additional amounts can be taken later if necessary. Now let's talk about the visa, right? Again, take a couple seconds to read what's on the screen. Okay, so the visa interview thing, it varies across countries. Generally, it's a big thing in the US, right? So the US students, you will have to take a visa interview. For other countries, I think a lot of my friends and stuff have gone to other countries without taking visa interviews and stuff. So I guess it's kind of optional for other countries. Not optional. I mean, some countries don't have it. So anyway, let's say there is a visa interview that you have to attend, and then will be done at the country's embassy in India. They'll ask you simple questions about why you're applying to college, what country, why that particular country, what you want to do after you graduate, all these basic questions. And then usually be scheduled approximately 1 month before you fly. It can be done earlier as well. Right? That's the thing about education loans and visas. So now let's get to the FAQs, right? So the FAQ parts we're going to run through very quickly, and then I'm going to tell you guys where you can find more information, and then we'll have our Q&A, right? So first question, how important is the GPA? So the GPA is super important, right? Ideally, you want to be in the top 5% of your class. If not, the next 15 to 20% of your class is going to be good. The next 20% is, I would consider decent. Anything below that is going to be bottom 50%, so that's not going to be considered a good GPA. Right? So of course, this is the reason why is because master's programs are generally academic programs, right? So they want someone who is good at academics. That's why all this GPA stuff is going to be very important, right? Then how can you get into Harvard, Stanford, MIT, all these top colleges around the world, Oxford, Cambridge, and all these guys? Essentially, you want to have a stellar GPA, a stellar GRE, GMAT, whatever they're asking for, strong research work and projects and internships and all that, a great SOP that details about why you're a perfect fit for that program, what you want to do in your career and all that, and glowing letters of recommendation from your professors and internship supervisors and all that. Right. Now, how can you find colleges that are good for your particular field? If your field is social work, psychology, human resource management, all that. Right? How can you find the field? Go to topuniversities.com, then go to rankings and go to rankings by subject, right? So that's where you can sort of find all the different university rankings for your particular subject. Right? So that's going to give you guys a list of universities that are going to be good for your particular field. Next, how to apply for scholarships. So essentially, there are two ways, right? First way is you go to the financial aid section in the university's website. So they'll generally have a list of scholarships that they know of that you can apply to. And they will have scholarships that the university itself might offer. Then we have open scholarships, right? So by the government and stuff, all these Fulbright scholarships, all these big companies in India offer scholarships like Tata, Birla, all these guys will offer scholarships. Okay. Again, if you want to take this down, 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Next, is work experience important? So work experience is not that important for your profile, depending on the program you're applying to. Okay. If you're applying to a program, let's say like policy or international affairs or definitely like MBA and stuff, right? Then work experience is going to be pretty important because it's going to speak to about what you want to do in your career, what kind of skills you bring to the table and all that. But if you're applying to say a master's in psychology or a master's in even social work, right? Work experience is going to be useful, but not that important for your profile, right? But the thing about work experience is it gives you time to build your profile, right? It gives you time to do research work on the side. That's what I did. Where I was working, I did research work on the side. It also gives you time to choose your specialization, get an extra letter of recommendation from your manager and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, what if you're confused about your degree in specialization and country? Now, I want you guys to take your time, right? Because this is a pretty big decision, right? You're basically thinking about your decision, whatever decision you make, it's going to impact the next 10 or 15 years of your career. There is going to be some room for you to shift your career in the future after that, but of course, this is going to be a pretty big decision. Right? So what you want to do is you want to take your time, speak to professors, seniors, make LinkedIn connections, Google for information, take online courses. There's no rush, right? If you guys want to take a year or two after your bachelor's or master's program, whatever, to decide what you want to do later in life, that's okay, right? Do not rush it because it is a pretty big decision. Right? Finally, a question I get asked a lot is studying in India versus studying abroad, right? Essentially, something that people tell you is that studying abroad gives you a lot more money, right? But that's not necessarily true, right? The thing about money and studying abroad is that, first of all, it costs a lot of money to study abroad, right? It's not cheap. And second thing is the money that you earn abroad, in terms of the purchasing power abroad, it's going to be pretty much the same. This means that if you get a good job at a good company in India versus if you get a good job at a good company abroad, you're going to be earning more or less the same in terms of the purchasing power. Of course, when you convert US dollars to Indian rupees or UK pounds to Indian rupees, it's going to be a lot of money. But then you are going to be living abroad. You're going to be earning your money in pounds or dollars, and you're also going to be spending your money in pounds or dollars, right? So for you, it's not going to make a big difference. Of course, when you send that money back, it is going to be a lot, right? But essentially, when you're thinking about studying abroad, there's two things that you need to think about, right? First is studying abroad gives you an opportunity to have an international career. So if you've always been someone that wants to work in different countries around the world, so that was like my dream, right? To work in like different countries around the world. So if you want to have like an international career, then having a degree from like a reputed international university is going to be very useful for you in your career, right? And it's going to open up, all sorts of networking opportunities and all that, right? And it also allows you to immigrate to different countries. So if your dream was always to, settle in the UK or settle in Finland or settle in Japan or all that kind of stuff, then studying abroad will be really useful, because once you study at a particular country, you sort of get a foothold there. And then from that foothold, you can build a career, build a life, and eventually settle in that country if you want to, right? So these are the main two reasons why I would recommend that you guys study abroad. If you don't want to have an international career and if you want to live in India for the rest of your life, then probably studying abroad is not a good idea for you. It might be better for you to study in India itself, right? So that is the FAQ. Now let's say you guys have more questions, right? More questions about what are the different opportunities available for you, what are the different degrees, questions about when you should take your examinations, how you should start your preparation for all these examinations. I recommend that you check us out, right? So through our Instagram page, we do like guides for each particular course. So we've done for psychology, social work, physiotherapy, and all a bunch of different courses we've done on our Instagram page and on our YouTube channel, because we always answer like a bunch of questions on our YouTube channel on how you guys can get started on your preparation. If you're applying with a 3-year degree, how you can apply with that, choosing GRE versus GMAT, when you should start your applications, the timeline for fall 22, all these kinds of admissions related questions I always answer in our YouTube channel. All right, so definitely check us out. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. All right, so that was our agenda for the today. So we talked a little bit about us. I gave you guys a bird's eye view of the application process. We looked at different degree options, most popular countries, general program requirements, building a strong profile, timeline of the process, getting an education loan and visa, and that's pretty much it, right? So that is it for the session. Thank you guys so much for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me your questions now. I can take questions for the next 5 or 10 minutes, again, depending on how many questions you guys have. And if you have any more questions after that, feel free to email us, connect@sessionpillow.com. I'll be happy to help. Right? So now we'll proceed towards the Q&A. Feel free to type your questions either in the chat, or you can even unmute yourself if you want to have a conversation. All right, so let's begin.
Actually, we had a question from Malvika. So many universities abroad require 15 years of education to opt for masters, but Indians have only 14 years of education, which pushes us to go for a diploma degree at first. Your suggestion regarding this is?
Right. So I think the number is a little bit wrong. A lot of universities abroad expect you to have 16 years of education, whereas a lot of Indian students will only have 15 years of education. Right? So how do you make up for that? First thing is, the easiest way is to just apply to universities that don't have that requirement. Right? So not every university will have that requirement. Generally, what happens is universities in UK will be okay with your 3-year bachelor's degree, because a lot of bachelor's degree programs in the UK are 3 years long. Right? That's where India got its system, I guess. I have no idea. But other countries, a lot of countries, again, the first thing you do is look for universities that don't have this requirement. Right? It's going to be pretty easy to find them. Even a lot of universities in the US and Canada do not have this requirement. Right? That's the first thing. Second thing is, yes, if you want to get into, let's say, a really good university that requires 16 years of education, then yes, a postgraduate diploma program in India will help you clear that requirement and then apply for that program abroad. Right? So that is something that a lot of my GRE students are doing as well. So that's something that you guys can check out. It can be a 1-year program, it can be a 2-year program, and then you'll have enough. I think generally it's a 1-year program, but some students do it for longer. Then you'll have enough years of education to be able to study abroad. Right? So first thing is to apply to universities that don't have that criteria. Second thing is to get that PGDP and then apply. Right? So those are pretty much the only 2 options that you guys will have when it comes to applying to those particular universities. Right? So yeah, go for that. Any other questions, guys? Feel free to ask your questions in the chat.
Yeah. So, certain countries provide good quality of education. And can you tell me why ranking in those countries are important of universities?
In terms of quality of education, I want you guys to focus less on the country itself and focus more on the university, right? So when I told you guys, best quality of education, good quality of education, lower quality of education, I was looking at the average ranking or basically the number of universities in the top 100 for that particular country. But for you guys, that's not really a metric that's going to be very important to you. A more important metric for you will be the ranking of the university, right? So the higher ranked the university, generally the better the quality of education. So if you go to, like, say, a rank 300 university in the US versus a rank, say, 20 university in Switzerland or something, right? That's going to be the better university that's going to offer a better quality of education. So when you guys apply and you're worried about the quality of education, look for the ranking of the universities rather than the quality of education offered by the country itself. Yeah. Oh, I see another question in the chat. A lot of Canadian universities require a 4-year UG or 3-year UG plus 1-year master's. Is it advisable to apply for master's after 3-year UG plus a diploma? If you have a PG after your undergraduate, right? If you have like a postgraduate diploma after your undergraduate, then I believe you should be able to apply for these programs that you just described in the chat, right? So if they require like a 4-year degree, 4-year undergraduate program, and you have like a 3 plus 1 year education, that should make you eligible for a lot of these universities. Before you apply, obviously just ask them or just confirm with them. But most of these universities will accept that as your education, right? So just taking 1-year master's program, 1-year postgraduate diploma program, perfectly fine. Yeah, any more questions, guys? All right, so if you guys don't have any questions now, you can always email me later. Again, my email is right there on the screen, connect@sessionpillar.com. And yeah. Okay, Malvika asks, can I do my diploma in any branch? Will that be okay? I would not recommend doing your diploma in any branch. For example, let's say you have a bachelor's in social work and you have a PGDP in, say, HR management, and then you're applying to, say, international affairs. Probably not a good idea, right? So you want to try to, if you have a plan of what you want to do towards in your master's program or your PhD program, I recommend that you do your postgraduate diploma in that particular area, or at least moving towards that direction, right? So if you are in master's in social work, and so if you are a bachelor's in social work student and you want to move towards, say, international affairs, right? And you need a 4-year degree program for that, maybe take a postgraduate diploma in, say, management or economics or something like that, right? So then some kind of program that would accept you towards moving that particular direction. So even public policy or even public affairs, urban development, economics. So these are all going to be degrees that you guys can sort of do to sort of move towards the international affairs field, right? So whatever your target goal is, the more closely oriented you are towards that goal, the better your chances to be able to be admitted into those universities at the end, right? So try not to do it from any random branch. Try to move towards the kind of career that you actually want to have. And he says, since psychology doesn't come under STEM, wouldn't US be a poor choice for doing masters since we are likely not to get work? I'm not very sure if psychology doesn't come under STEM or not, because psychology does come under science, right? So I would recommend that you guys double check that. I haven't personally checked it, but let's say that it does come under STEM. If it does come under STEM, then it's a safe option. You guys can go there, work there for 3 years, apply for H-1B. If you don't get it, you have to leave. That's like everyone's story, right? If it doesn't come under STEM, then yes, it is a little bit problematic for you to apply to the US for your master's program, because again, you're only allowed to work there for 1 year, right? So, but there are some how do I say this? There are some exceptions as well, right? For example, let's say you're a bachelor's in psych student, right? And you want to get into a PhD in psych in the future, but you don't have the research experience. So what you want to do is you want to apply for a master's in psych first. So you apply to the US for a master's in psych degree, right? And then you study that for 2 years. You work there for 1 year. Now you have solid research experience and work experience. Now you apply for a PhD program, either in the US or UK, wherever you want to. And you can use that master's degree from the US as a stepping stone to your PhD program, right? So this is like an exception that you guys can use. But if you're just planning on taking your master's and then just working in your target country, then the US is generally not a good idea. If psychology does not come out of STEM, I'm not entirely sure about this. I should probably check into this. And I recommend that you guys look into this as well, right? Just check, is psychology under STEM, right? Okay, so I think those are all the questions. Last question. What is your opinion on the quality of education in New Zealand? So New Zealand has like, I think, one good university. I don't remember the name of the university, but generally New Zealand is a smaller economy with fewer number of universities. That's why the quality of education is not that good, because if you don't get into that one good university in New Zealand, which I think comes under the top 50 universities around the world, so it is a pretty solid university. If you don't get to that particular university, then maybe not a good place, right? But the thing about quality of education that you guys sort of need to understand is that it's relative, right? If you are planning to, let's say, apply to New Zealand and you want to live in New Zealand and work in New Zealand, you want to settle in New Zealand, then it doesn't matter what quality of education New Zealand offers, right? Because as long as you go to one of the better universities in New Zealand, then nobody cares, right? Because in New Zealand, everybody will be from that New Zealand university, and they won't say, hey, you're not from MIT, so I'm not going to give you a job and all that, right? So they won't care. So if you guys are planning to apply to Canada, same story goes, right? As long as you get into a good college in Canada, then you can get into good jobs and you can have a good life in Canada, right? So quality of education, it can be relative as well, depending on the country you're applying to. So if you're planning to stay in a particular country, try to get into the better universities in that particular country, and that's going to pave your career. That's going to give you like a strong amount of quality of network connections, and like give you like a good base from which you can launch your career in that particular country, right? So there's a little bit of complication when it comes to this. All right. Okay, so I think those are all the questions you guys have. Thank you all so much for attending. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to help you guys out. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful presentation. Indeed, it was informative and interactive. You have explained about steps in application process, various available degree options for social work students, pros and cons about popular countries for education, and building a strong profile and a clear explanation about the timeline of the process and so on. And also you have patiently answered to all the questions. So once again, thank you, sir. Gratitude is the simplest yet most powerful things humans can do for each other. So I request Ms. Lavanya from third year BSW to deliver vote of thanks.
Thank you, Nilsar. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Madras School of Social Work and Youth Resource Center, I would like to thank everyone for their presence and making this webinar a great success. I extend my gratitude to our guest speaker, Mr. Sachin Pulil, for sharing your valuable information with us. It was an amazing session, and I'm sure that it will help us to pursue our dreams. And I would like to thank, excuse me, and I would like to thank our assistant professor and coordinator of Youth Resource Center, Mr. Xavier Vivek Jerry, and YRC team for organizing such a wonderful webinar on career counseling. Last but not the least, I thank all our participants for making this webinar successful. Make use of these and have a great future. All the best, guys. Finally, I thank YRC team for giving me this opportunity. Once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
We have come to the end of the session. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you dream it, you can do it. With this quote, let me conclude. Have a nice day. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.